Hey, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This is YARA Rules 101. You're going to learn how to write and use high-quality rules for threat hunting and detection with some of our experts here at ReversingLabs. My name is Paul Roberts, and I am the Director of Editorial and Content here at ReversingLabs, and I'm really happy to be with you this afternoon and get a chance to do a really important and much needed lesson on YARA rule creation. So hope you'll join me in welcoming our speakers, our guests today. First is Danil Panache, who is a solutions architect here at ReversingLabs. Danil, you want to say hi?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. You'll hear my voice plenty here, so I'll quiet down for now, but looking forward to this.
Great. And second is Laura Dabelic, who is a threat analyst here at ReversingLabs, so she maintains our classification YARA rules, as well as our public YARA repository. Laura, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to showing you some hands-on examples on tweaking and writing YARA rules.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A really important topic, and something that is, YARA rules are just critical these days in threat hunting, threat monitoring. So yeah, thank you both for joining us. First of all, ReversingLabs, for those of you who don't know it, ReversingLabs is well, we're a 15-year-old company. We actually just celebrated our 15-year anniversary, and so we've been around for a while. And for much of that time, we have been focused in the threat intelligence space. Over the years, we've continuously improved our solutions, and we're now a trusted authority in software and file security. Our threat repository tracks over 40 billion with a B files, both malware and goodware and grayware. And that number obviously continues to grow as our threat research team is out there analyzing, categorizing new malware instances and goodware daily. This is both stuff we find, stuff that's submitted to us. And that repository, 40 billion files, that's about 7 times larger than our closest competitor. What most people don't know is that more than 60 of the leading cybersecurity companies, companies you probably rely on, trust our data and feeds and use them in the solutions that are helping to keep your organization safe. So we are a critical supplier to many cybersecurity companies. And we've obviously received accolades both for our technology and also actually from our channel partners, as well as being recognized by Gartner as a leading software supply chain security provider and a contributor to the 2024 edition of Verizon's Data Breach Investigation Report. So that's who ReversingLabs is. Moving along to our agenda, we're going to do a quick kind of overview of YARA rules, kind of their history and what, where they come from, what they do. And then we will move on. Danil's going to walk through some of the implementations of YARA rules, kind of what YARA rules can be used for, different instantiations. And then Laura's going to give you a kind of lesson in creating your own YARA rules and customizing them to suit your needs. There's a lot of flexibility with that. So that's what we have in store for you. Okay, so let's just move ahead. A brief history of YARA. So obviously YARA rules are just a critical component of the modern threat and defense complex. The YARA just stands for yet another recursive acronym. Some people say yet another ridiculous acronym, but it's kind of an amusing name. But they were developed by Victor Alvarez, who is a VirusTotal employee, still is. Obviously, VirusTotal is now part of Google. And Victor released the first kind of YARA rules on GitHub back in 2013. You can go and check out that repo. And basically, it was a way to use patterns, textual binary patterns, for malware detection or to find other, threats lurking within your environment. I mean, the whole notion of signature detection is, well established within the security field. It's been used in antivirus for a long time. This is a way of kind of creating signatures of a sort that you could use to hunt for threats within your environment across your IT network and so on. They're multi-platform. You can use YARA rules, across Windows, Linux, Mac OS, and so on, and can be used, accessed and deployed using command line interface, Python scripts, etc. And there are tons of security firms and public agencies creating, distributing, sharing YARA rules. It's a very much of a kind of grassroots phenomena, and one that is growing. I mean, I think the population of YARA rules, as well as the number of organizations and people contributing YARA rules to the public, to GitHub, are huge. ReversingLabs, obviously, is one of the companies known for creating and distributing YARA rules ourselves. So that's kind of the brief history of YARA. Yeah, just moving on. I'm going to pass the mic, to Danil, and he's going to talk about how to use YARA rules, how you can actually apply them within your organization. So Danil, take it over.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Paul. And I believe there should be a poll coming up shortly, if not already. But before I dive into these examples, we did look around kind of what are the biggest applications from our customer base. I queried some of our internal resources and threat research teams as well. So what we'll be going through are, to a certain degree, real world examples. I'm not going to say these are exact copies of those YARA rules that we've taken from those environments, but they're a facsimile, if you will, of the ways that these YARA rules are being applied. And I know we went through some of these pieces already in the agenda, but I'll be doing a deeper dive into each piece and kind of going through why each component of a YARA rule and each capability of a YARA rule is important. So let's go ahead and dive into. There we go. So first and foremost, as I'm sure many of you are aware of, this is malware hunting, retro hunting, threat hunting. These are activities that YARA rules were created with them in mind. There's two main distinctions between these kind of approaches, even though a lot of times they're applied in similar methods. So on the left-hand side, we have malware hunting, and that's when we're looking for, in a forward-looking perspective. So as we're seeing files in an organization, as we're processing files, whether they're coming from different data sources, buckets of data, data lakes, if you will, all of these files will have to flow through organizations in some way, shape, or form. So it's incredibly imperative for us to be able to scan these files and be able to do that really quickly and at scale. So as these files are flowing through, ensuring that these files aren't rife with malware, don't have malicious code in them, is one of the biggest pieces of where YARA rules are being used. Conversely, retro hunting, that's usually something where an analyst or a threat researcher will have some idea, some hypothesis that they're trying to test backwards facing. And this could be starting off with a single sample. So think of your typical incident response procedure where you have a flag, an alert comes up around a file that may or may not be malicious or suspicious. Now, you want to understand as a threat researcher or an analyst, hey, has this been seen before? Is this something that we've encountered before in any way, shape, or form? Is this part of a targeted attack, or is this opportunistic? Is this part of a more organized entity, or is it something that's coming down the line from some random individual on the internet? And so this really does help pare down on exactly what, where and how this has been seen before, in order to continue those incident response and then remediation efforts. I think it's incredibly important to focus on the reduction of false positive hits piece, and we'll go through some of how we approach that with the rule creation process. But it is very important to ensure that the rules that you create and that you use are matching just the things that you wanted to match. Because again, the sheer plethora of files, the volume out there is enormous, and it's very difficult to pick and choose every single bit of noise. So your signal to noise ratio should be very, very high. A couple examples here that we want to go through, and I'll show you what it looks like in a full YARA rule in a second here. But first and foremost, being able to check file types with header magic. A lot of times it's important. If you're looking for byte sequences, if you're looking for API functionality, that's great to have out of the gate, but this really helps to pare down the amount of time it takes for these YARA rules to actually process. So if, for example, you know that you're looking at a malware variant that only affects portable executable files, you can use this specific flag here, the UN16 0x5A4D, to match against that magic header. In this case, it's MZ for the PE files. And this really helps to narrow down the scope, especially if you set it up in the very beginning of the conditions screen of the YARA rule. Then looking for process injection APIs, for example, or just APIs in general. What are you looking for when it comes to strings? Are you looking for the capabilities that typical malware variants have? Is it specifically a malware variant that is using this capability? We want to make sure that we're paring that down as well. Hex patterns are incredibly important to go through, and I'll talk about that probably ad nauseum moving forward. But having those specific assembly strings is incredibly important to not just reduce the false positives, but also account for variance. And Laura is going to go through kind of how that looks like in a real world example. Again, what we're looking at here is going to be more pared down, but please keep that in mind as we go through the process. And of course, wildcards, being able to create ranges, being able to have flexibility, those question marks you see in a hex string up top, those are all areas of flexibility. And that's the beauty of YARA. It's a standard, as Paul mentioned, it's grassroots effort, but it is a standard that can be applied in many different ways. And we'll go through that in a couple of seconds here. All right, so very simple malware hunting example. This is about as generic as it gets, just for the purposes of an example here. But typically, YARA rules are structured with three main areas. We have the metadata up top, we have the strings, and then we have the condition. The metadata is realistically just for who wrote it, when, why are we detecting it, what are the purposes around it. A lot of times, organizations will also use this section for specific metadata related to their own products. So, for example, ReversingLabs uses this section to note down some specific ReversingLabs type metadata that helps us organize, that helps us figure out kind of how that data is being used and where we can apply it inside of the organization. Strings, this is what we were talking about earlier on. This is how we can determine what is the actual functionality. How is this malware variant or whatever it is we're trying to capture actually working? So these are just some very, very common patterns here. I'll be honest, these will probably match a lot, so don't use this verbatim. You'll see the proper application of these patterns when Laura goes through it. But these are just a couple examples. Assembly code patterns that from the very top level align to how the malware performs decryption. If there's any kind of API hashing, it's a great way to capture that as well. If you care about C2 and command and control communication, there's certain types of patterns that match that really, really well. And so these are all just examples of how to apply these different patterns. And you'll notice there's a ton of question marks in there, which means that these are applicable across the board. So it's a very fine line you have to thread in between having the right amount of efficacy, having the right amount of detail without it excluding the things that you want it to capture. And that's why a lot of times YARA rule creation will be an iterative effort. You will have to go through it several times and you'll have to test it several times in order to really confirm that it's capturing only the things that you intended to capture. The very last piece on the strings, those function names, same kind of idea that we had in the previous page, where we're looking for, in this case, some function names that malware can use to pose as legitimate. You'll notice there's an extra caveat at the end called full word. That just means that it has to match that word specifically. And that's very useful, especially when, again, it comes to function names, that it only matches that specific word, because a lot of times function names will will be longer and might include that specific component in it. Now, conditions are where we can really help optimize the YARA rules. So that's why I mentioned before that PE header, right? 5A4D. That's a great one to include at first because guess what? It's going to exclude anything that doesn't match it. It's going to exclude ELFs. It's going to exclude Mac objects. It's only going to match on portable executable files. So that immediately helps pare it down into just the files you're looking for. And after that, think of it as a combination of Boolean expressions where you can pick and choose which patterns you want to match. And this could be all of them. A lot of times it is. If you have specific byte sequences you want to match and you're looking for specifically a variant and you want to look for only that piece of it, a lot of times it'll just be all of them. Sometimes it'll be a combination. Sometimes it'll be an and or. And again, that's something that Laura will go through. I'm not going to try to steal too much of her thunder here. So that's a very basic, bare bones kind of example for what a YARA rule looks like, especially when it comes to malware hunting. Now, as we go into this, there we go, we can use it for other purposes as well. So think of email analysis. I'm not saying that this is the best way. I'm not saying that this is the only way to scan emails. There's a ton of cool tips and tricks that a lot of ESGs out there have that do email scanning. These are just some ideas of how to leverage YARA rules to maybe bolster your email posture here. And so it's a great way because YARA supports regex, because it supports string search, because it's meant for this kind of activity. It's incredibly easy to use that and munge that in order to look for phishing attempts, looking for malicious documents, social engineering patterns, etc. And that's what we see here under the abilities and examples. If, for example, you're looking for suspicious sender patterns. I know Microsoft-support.com is legitimate, but let's say, for example, it's Visa-support. Maybe they don't own that domain. Well, that gives us an idea that, hey, we can use this and we can also combine it with, Visa with a 1.com. So that gives us a little more flexibility in how we're approaching those suspicious sender patterns. The language piece is at the risk of being part of it myself, is super important, and you need to take immediate action on it. But realistically, it's all about matching. What is the tone of the email? What is the tone of the message? If there's urgency, typically that means you should approach it with a bit of caution there. Same idea that we had before with the malicious attachment types. In this case, we're looking for ELF files, just as an example. You can do the same thing with portable executables. You can do the same thing with other types of files. As long as it matches that magic header, you can use that as part of the condition statements. And of course, all the other ones, phishing markers, credential harvesting, these are all pieces that you can include in your YARA rule as you're creating it. So for example here, we have some. And I apologize for the regex soup on the top here. We'll have some more of that down the road. But in this case, we're looking at a couple of different ways that you can use some of the typical phrases you'll find in phishing emails and phishing patterns to combine and contrast them with each other. So I'll be kind of jumping between the strings and the condition here a little bit, but for example, if you're looking at Google and you want to make a note that if it's a 0 instead of an O, if it's a 1 instead of an L, if it's a 3 instead of an E, all of those the leet speak, if you will, those are pretty common when it comes to spoofing domains. I know a lot of times there'll even be non-ASCII characters that are being used in that regard, and that could also be potentially leveraged within YARA rules. But point is that this is something that we do look for, at least from the email security side, to ensure that whatever we're doing is legitimate and is coming from a source that we believe it to be the right source. We'll go through a different example a little bit further down around brand reputation, and I think it's good to keep in mind both the receiving side as well as ensuring that your organization is keeping tabs on what's out there that may be spoofing their own brand. But we'll get to that when we get to that. Of course, the urgent language patterns, we talked about it. If there's any kind of urgency in the email, that should immediately raise at least a caution flag for you. And you can go from there in figuring out, hey, is this something that's necessary for me to understand, or is it something that's more benign and not as important? And of course, all the rest of these are mostly keywords. The very bottom, social engineering, gift card, winning, inheritance. It could be a Nigerian prince offering you a large sum of money. There's a lot of examples here. Obviously, I can't include all of them in a YARA rule, but this gives you an idea of the flexibility that you can have with combining any any combination of these patterns or these strings or matches to give you an idea. Hey, is this something that will hit on my YARA rule? The last thing I want to note here, you can also add in things like file size limitations. This is, again, a use for, excuse me, for limiting the amount of false positives out there. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. All right, brand protection. This is what I was talking about before. There's a couple of cool ways you can use YARA rules within brand protection. Now, again, as I said with all of these, I'm not showing you what is what is exactly verbatim what people are using it for, but this is a sanitized version of what I've seen being used in the past. So please take this with a grain of salt. But all of these can be used as a way of detecting certain patterns, detecting certain elements that could be indicative of someone trying to impersonate a brand. If someone is trying to impersonate a well-known brand, trying to steal legitimacy, if you will, around the email or around a communication or around a file, if it's a PDF, if it's a website as well. These are all applicable uses for those kinds of detections. And so if there's a specific RGB value for your logo, for example, or if you're looking for all the company name variations, and you feel like mucking your way through the regex picket fences, that's a fantastic way to do it as well. If there's specific product identifiers, if you have specific phones, as an example here, or types of products, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of that. If there's any kind of counterfeiting, percentage discounts for pricing, if there's any kind of fake emails for domain squatting, these are all pieces of the puzzle that could be in line with looking at and determining whether or not something is being used potentially maliciously. So I apologize for the wall of text here, but there is a method to the madness. Very, very top, again, what we talked about before, those company name variations, and there's a couple of different ways we can go about it. One thing I will note here that I didn't note previously, you'll see the no case flag there. That means that it'll apply regardless of what the case of the letters is. Now, it doesn't always matter for things like emails, domains, because they're not always case sensitive. But when it comes to things like brand names, sometimes, to bypass certain filters or to bypass certain easier kind of guards, if you will, against the spam or against the brand impersonation. Sometimes threat actors will add in a letter or add in a number, and this is a great way to capture that information as well. If, for example, your organization doesn't have the money to purchase all the different variants of your own domain, this is a great way to keep a lookout for that too. If you're looking for store, shop, outlet, or authorized or authentic, again, all fantastic use cases for YARA. Product identifiers, if you're using, for example, Acme, and you have a product Roadrunner Pro and Coyote Traps, Acme Rockets, great way to identify, is this something that is potentially ripping off of my organization's product set? And of course, the same idea before, counterfeit indicators, we can use the same concept. The logo detection, I think, is one that's particularly interesting and kind of cool because if you have a specific logo color, right? If it's say Acme Black as 000, and let's assume that maybe it's something a little more interesting, you can also track the logo shape using the bytecode sequences, and that's something that you can use with the YAR rule here. I did forget one curly bracket at the end there, so hopefully no one calls me out. But in this case, it will look for certain patterns, and if it detects it, hey, that logo matches. And a lot of times logos, especially if you use a specific string, it is something that you can use to do the matching and figure out, hey, this is actually the logo for my organization. It's not being used by a permission. We want to make sure we do use it, but we want to make sure that it's being used properly. And last but not least, compliance and DLP. Again, there are other tips and tricks with DLP solutions out there that go beyond just regex. But if you're looking for a way to ensure that files leaving your organization or files coming into your organization don't contain certain flags or don't contain certain PII. This is a great way to do it, again, through the power of regex. If you're looking for credit card numbers, social security numbers, API and access keys, assuming they follow a specific format. Healthcare data is another great example. Or, you just be looking for things like password or secret or key. These are all great ways to look at it, or to at least ensure that there's no plain text iterations of these patterns showing up within the file that you're sending in or you're receiving. And again, same principle that we talked about before. As long as the strings match a certain subset of conditions, and it could be any combination. In this case, we have several different ways of going about it. So, for example, the PII combination, you can have any of the social security number, email, phone, and combined with the confidential internal use only do not share identifying internal document marker. That's the way you can munch this, and the way you can use the different capabilities of YARA, especially on the condition side, is infinite. So if you are, if you're looking, or if you're seeing an influx of emails, or if you're seeing an influx of files where it's a social security number and it has some other information in there, let's say, credit card information or a phone, then the last rule here, the multiple PII on the same file, will also apply. And so there's different ways you can use this data. As a recommendation, regex can be a little heavier on the processing and the workload side, but if used judiciously, it's a good way to segment out exactly what you need to see from the YARA rule hits. All right. And right back to Paul here.
So thanks, Danil. So Danil, we actually, before we move along, we got a question from Kumar, who said, going back to that first YARA rule, but that you had as an example, could we run a YARA rule like that on a Windows memory image? So that, again, that was the first YARA rule you were looking at.
Yes, great question. Again, not going to steal Laura's thunder here, but let me go back to the sorry, a couple slides back. The answer is sort of. This condition down here, the portable executable, would need to be changed. And again, I don't want to steal Laura's thunder because I know she's going to go through this, but there are ways you can run YARA rules against memory images or against memory dumps, which, as long as you have the right conditions in place, it can be doable.
It's useful to repeat things. We have a concrete example right here. In this example of this concrete rule, you should remove this condition of which includes header magic value, because very often memory dumps are missing the file headers magic values. So if you want to test your YARA rule on the memory dumps, it's obligatory to remove this condition about 5A4D. It's obligatory to remove the condition which expects the header magic value to be at the very beginning of the file. So yes, the answer is yes. With this little tweak, you can use a YARA rule on a memory dump. We can proceed.
Great.
Absolutely. Sorry, I have to go through a few of these. Oop.
Okay.
All right. Now back to Laura.
Okay, next slide, please.
Absolutely.
So what makes a good YARA rule? As you know, YARA rules are used for static analysis, but malware can be polymorphic and it can be changed. So it works much better on those threads which have a consistent structure. So it is known that the code base within the same malware families are often reused. And we are going after that. Of course, YARA has its limitations, and shortly I'm going to show you how to deal with that while deploying your YARA rules by some little tweaks. So a good example would be that the campaigns can make a little tweaks, for example, to the hard-coded strings. This is one reason why using hard-coded strings, for example, the code values for a JSON internal structure are not a good idea, because the code base is very often the same, but the hard-coded strings may change from one campaign to another. You can have two campaigns which are 1 month apart, and the only thing that the threat actors could change would be those hard-coded strings, but the code base will stay the same. So the better approach is to use the YARA rules which detect the code patterns. This is why you're going to see only the code patterns demonstrated on the YARA rules shortly after. And our YARA rules aim to be precise and detailed, because we have decided that we prefer having false negatives over false positives. Okay, Danil, are you going to say something on this slide before demonstration?
Yeah, I was going to say something on the next slide, but I can definitely say something in this one. So with our YARA rules, and again, we have one of the experts here, Laura, who's made the YARA rules. It's you'll notice the stark difference between the example I showed, which is a very simple byte sequence, to what Laura is going to go through. It's all about specificity. It's all about ensuring the lowering of the false positives out there. Before we go into Laura's example, though, last thing that we want to talk about real quick here is reliable sources of YARA rules. I'm sure many of you are familiar with more than this. These are ones that we have sourced from some of our internal engineers, analysts. From the threat intelligence world, CISA, US CERT releases great YARA rules as part of their advisories a lot of times. And we also have some other ones in here that are coming from our internal engineers and analysts, including abuse.ch, their YARA hub. Inquest has some great YARA rules. I do want to have a special shout out for Florian, who is the CTO of Nextron Systems. Valhalla is a fantastic page for YARA rules, as well as Florian's direct GitHub link down at the very bottom has some great examples, and I may or may not have stolen a few of them in the past. So thank you for all your efforts there. And without further ado,
are we ready for the demonstration?
We are. Let's go ahead and do that.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Do you all see this? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So in this example, I'm going to show you two YARA rules, as these are the kind of YARA rules you can find in our public YARA repository. You have seen a screenshot of our public YARA repository a few slides earlier. So these two examples are for malware family KLogExe, which is an info stealer, and another example is for one Linux backdoor, which is called nude-ret. In the past, we made mostly YARA rules for ransomware. However, during the last year and a half, we have expanded our focus on info stealers and backdoors. A little disclaimer here, remote access tools are called internally backdoors in our systems, just to clarify this. So let's move on with the first example. First example shows the KLogExe, which I have already said is an info stealer. This rule detects two versions of KLogExe. As you can see, the conditions are named very clearly and grouped. This means that the function for resolving imports dynamically and collecting clipboard data is the same in both versions, while the functions which are used for network communication with command and control server are different. As you can see, this other condition, which detects communication with command and control server, is split into small conditions for readability. So what does it mean if you want to see in IDA Pro? For example, if you open a sample in IDA Pro, this function right here shows the byte pattern I have shown here. This is a function which communicates with command and control server, and the representation of the pseudocode is here for version 1 and right here for version 2. I want to touch on one of the aforementioned YARA limitations, which is that your pattern will not trigger if you make just a little tweaks to the code base. For example, you can put here some NOP instructions or some junk code, and this will result in your rule not triggering. That's just the limitation of the YARA itself. However, I will share some advice and some tips and tricks how you can deal with it if in some fictitious scenario you have deployed our public YARA rules in your repository. For example, one thing you can do is you can tweak the condition a little bit. You can remove this part which detects the communication with command and control server, and you can just leave the patterns which detect collecting the clipboard data and resolving imports dynamically, because as I said before, these two have appeared in different these two have been the same and consistent among the versions. Another thing you can do is, as you can see, if you look at the code, you can see that it's basically the same with some little tweaks. So what you can do is you can play around not just with the conditions, but also with patterns themselves. You can shorten it, for example. If you remove a couple of lines, you may increase your chances of the pattern being triggered, because the part of the pattern you have cut out may just be the part where the junk code was, for example. That's demonstration number 1. And demonstration number 2 would be about this Linux backdoor called nudret. This YARA rule detects only one version of the nudret. We have this magic value here, header magic value, because this is an ELF executable since it attacks Linux systems. And we have some aptly named pattern names. How the backdoor on the remote access tool changes its name on system to hide itself. We have these 2 patterns concerning that behavior here. We have this pattern split in 3 smaller patterns which deal with decrypting the configuration, which I have opened here. So this is part of the code which does exactly that, decrypting the configuration within the remote access tool. And usually these are some demonstrative code-based examples that you should use while writing your own YARA rules. So when you write your own YARA rules, aim about the most typical behaviors you can see in a certain family type. For remote access tools, as I said before, a good thing would be to write, to choose the pattern which describes the decryption of configuration. And in info stealers, good thing to choose for a pattern would be collecting clipboard data, because that's what info stealers do. moving on. Also, and of course, encrypting and sending the data, because just to make it much more stealthy, to make the communication between the remote access tool and its command control server much more stealthy. That's why you need to encrypt your data before sending it. Next thing I want to show you is two use cases of deploying our YARA rules. So the use case one, if you let's say, for example, that you have a Linux server and you have deployed our Node-RED YARA rule in the system to monitor for threats. And you let the YARA rule be unaltered. So all the conditions need to be triggered, needs to be fulfilled for the rule to trigger. In this scenario, if you have deployed our YARA rule and it is unaltered and it has been triggered, that means that over 90% of probability that you have been infected. That is a red alert situation, and you should act accordingly. You should scan your system, and you should really make a really good sweep on your server to see for any possible threat. That's example number one. Example number two, let's say that you have a large file base, a bunch of files, thousands and thousands, even more. And you can scan for any, you want to hunt for any potential threats. What you can do in this case, you can tweak the rule to be more loose. How would you do that? To change the condition. Instead of and, you can put or everywhere, as I show you now. In this case, you could detect some potentially malicious behavior, which could be overcome if the rule stood strict. And as I mentioned before, we've got the question, what if you have some memory dumps you want to scan? What you would do in this case, you would remove this. You would remove the condition which concerns the header magic value. If you tweak the rule like this, if you make the conditions loose, you have a very high chance of detecting some potentially malicious behaviors on the files in your system. However, loosening the rule has its consequences. If the conditions are made more loose, then the chance of false positives increases. So for this example, in this scenario number 2, if you have deployed a tweaked YARA rule into your system, and if the tweaked YARA rule with loosened conditions have triggered, then it would be a yellow alert, because there's still a probability of some of it perhaps being false positives. So this has been the demonstration of the two use cases, of a couple of use cases, how you can expand the scope of YARA and circumvent some of YARA's limitations by making just a little tweaks. So you can play around. So to recap, you can play around with conditions, and switch up between and or you can shorten the pattern, or you can remove the header magic condition if you suspect that have some memory dumps could have traces of some malicious artifacts. And that would be all from my demonstration. If you have any examples, I'm all ears.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laura. All right. Well, there's been a couple of great questions already asked, and I appreciate those coming in. Please keep them going. If we can't answer them now, we might, it gives us ammunition for a potential future webinar. Not to step on Paul's toes here.
No worries at all. No worries at all. So yeah, obviously, if there are any other questions, feel free to throw them into the Q&A feature or potentially into the chat if you want to. But otherwise, let's just we'll move along. And thank you so much, Laura and Danil. It was a great conversation. And obviously, there's a poll going on now. How much have you operationalized YARA rules within your organization? So take a second to reply to that as well. And coming up next for within here at ReversingLabs, we've got some interesting future content coming up. We've got some webinars exposing software supply chain weaknesses, which is going to be coming up in later this month on the 20th of November. And that is with IDC's Katie Norton. We would urge you to check that out. We've also got a event on November 21st, Global Perspectives on Software Supply Chains. So we're going to be exploring with the National Cybersecurity Center, exploring some emerging regulations, both in the US, more likely in the EU and UK, regarding software supply chain. And I'm sorry, I skipped over in terms of YARA resources, and this will be part of the information we share as well. There are a bunch of resources that you can check out, both the open source YARA rules that ReversingLabs has published on GitHub. And let me just see, I'll just throw this into the chat for everyone. Oops, sorry.
It's already in there, Paul.
And it is. Okay, sorry. And yeah, so we've got those, and you can check them out both on our website and on GitHub. So that's what we've got for you. And again, thank you all for attending. Look ahead, again, next week, we've got a couple more webinars coming up. And obviously, when you get a chance following this, take a second and give us a review. Let us know how things went and what you found useful, what we could improve on. And but otherwise, I wanted to say thanks to Danil and Laura for taking the time. This is a great presentation.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Really quickly, I think there was one last question there around guidance on deployment. Obviously, self-servantly, you can use ReversingLabs for YARA deployment, but you can also leverage YARA within Python. So there's a number of different ways. And as we talked about before, there's other ways to do it. Those are just the ways that I've gone through it myself. But I'll also let Laura chime in here as a practitioner.
I want to say thank you for your time. I hope that you learned something new. I hope I gave you some ideas how to improve the usage of our YARA rules, some use cases you can check, and I hope to see you next time. If you have any questions, hit us up, and I'm open to answering them.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, Laura. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Danil. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.